Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about something that I've been needing to talk about for a while. Nothing serious, don't worry. The reason I'm making this video is more so because I am taking a creative writing class and it requires me to make this video. Now this is a video I would have made regardless. I probably would have waited a little longer, and the reason we're here is I'm going to be discussing the Pentalogy. What is a pentalogy? It's like a trilogy where you have like three stories that all work together to form one story, except the pentalogy is five stories that are all together to create one story. And it's something I've been working on for a little while now, probably, I think like a year and a half ish about now. And at the beginning of the 2024 to 2025 school year, I took up a creative writing class, and it's been really fun. It's been a great outlet for writing, and it's really helped me with the pentalogy. Part of the reason I'm making this video is for that class. As I stated, I also wanted to make a video talking about my stories. There's something I do want to push out. They're not something I'm going to try to sell for probably copyright reasons mostly, but also I'm just kind of writing them for fun anyways. So basically this video doubles as not only me being able to throw my stories out there and hopefully get some feedback on them, but also to aid my multi-genre project, which is kind of like the final project of the class. Before I start, obviously my teacher already probably has like the links and stuff to my stories. You guys probably don't, and I'm going to be talking about them. There's probably going to be some spoilers in here, so if you go down to the description, I will have them in there. There is the flash fiction story, that is the first one in the pentalogy of the five. It's the first one of five. The second one is Those Dark Nights, and the third one is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. The fourth and fifth one are still in progress, so the fifth one I haven't even started on yet. It's going to be a little while until I get to that point, because the second one's probably going to be kind of long. But yeah, I recommend you read those before watching the rest of this video, because there will probably be some spoilers towards the middle and or end. So keep that in mind. So without further ado, let's get right into it with how it started. When I first started making the pentalogy, there wasn't really a story, or there wasn't really supposed to be one. The very first origin of the pentalogy was with the second story in the series, that being Those Dark Nights. And the way it started was I had seen some FNaF VHS videos on YouTube, three in particular. The names of those being Paranormal Investigation, Police Archive, and then Mangle underscore, and then there's a bunch of numbers that relate to the video. All three of those VHS videos will be linked in the description somewhere as well. And basically what I did is after watching them, those three in particular I liked so much, I thought it'd be fun to basically take those scenarios, those videos, and kind of just rewrite them in my own way for no other reason than just for the heck of it, just for fun, you know? In the Paranormal Investigation video, there's a guy, I believe his name is Sean in the VHS, which I actually kept that consistent with my story. And Sean is basically hired by a company to check out, I think it's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza or Pizzeria. I forget the exact name. It's been a while since I've watched the videos. And he basically goes in and, does paranormal investigator stuff with a spirit box and ovulus, I think is how you pronounce it. Basically just devices to communicate with spirits. And eventually he's chased out, and I believe he ends up getting shot and killed in the end. And then like the VHS video or whatever ends with whoever just shot him picking it up and stopping recording. And I really like that one. I don't want to go into too much detail about these because I really do think you should watch them yourselves. Be warned, some of them are scary, especially the Mangle one. That one, legit, I had to sleep. I had to sleep with the lights on one night after watching that. I'm not even joking. It was pretty scary. And then there's the Police Archive one, where there's two police officers. They pull over like a stolen truck. I forget if it's actually a U-Haul truck or not, but it's basically just a storage truck. I use U-Haul truck in my story. And, two police officers are pretty chill about it. They're like, oh, stuff like this happens all the time. We'll just run your identifications or whatever and get you out of here. Turns out the vehicle is stolen, and the guys shoot and kill one of the cops and then take off into the woods. So the other officer takes off after them, and then they end up at some old abandoned building and have a bit of a shootout, a bit of a scuffle. They have an animatronic with them, which I believe is Foxy, the original Foxy, and then the cop that survived is there fighting Foxy, and eventually he calls for backup. Backup arrives, and, they get the bad guys, they arrest them or whatever. Another one that I really, really liked, one that was also kind of surprising, because usually in those situations, especially with the VHS tapes and the nature of those, you're like, okay, this dude's going to die now. Okay, well, he didn't die then. He's going to definitely die now, and then he just never dies, and it's like, oh, cool. And then the final one, the Mangle one, is basically there's two night guards. I think one is supposed to be a bit newer to the job, and the other one's a bit more experienced, and the newer guy is like, dude, I'm freaking out. I hate these things. And then the more experienced guy is like, all right, dude, get the heck out of here. I'll take your shift tonight. And the more experienced guy the whole time is like, this less experienced guy doesn't know what he's talking about, saying the robots here are haunted and all that. And he's like, ghosts aren't even real. He finds out very quick that they are real. And he ends up being killed by the toy Foxy or Mangle animatronic that's there. Another one that I really liked, I don't know, it's just the horror aspect of it was really good. Again, that one made me sleep with the lights on one night. It was pretty good, So the way I used these is I kind of rewrote them a little bit. I mean, a lot of the things are very similar. I basically just stole it, if I'm being 100% honest. But like a lot of my other stories where I use elements from other places, is I build my own story around it. And as I mentioned, there originally wasn't supposed to be a story. I was just like, hey, I like these. I want to make my own slightly altered version of it just for fun, because I like to write sometimes, If I find something I like and I want to write about it, I will write about it. It'll be fun. And eventually I just thought like, hey, what would the next part of the story be? Like, we have these three ideas, they kind of go together. What would the next step be? Which is when we get the section of the next step of, because I had like some new characters that I added, like Ben and Lizzie, and I had a thing where they're talking, and then I had characters of like, oh, the owner of the pizzeria with the toy Foxy that killed Donovan is what I called him, which I think in the VHS it's Jeremy. I forget the exact name. Again, it's been a while since I've watched those, but they're really good. But basically, I still end up building like my own story off of it, because they end up hiring, like Lizzie and Ben end up bringing like Ty in, and then they all kind of decide like, why don't we bring in our own paranormal investigator who's a bit more experienced, and he will let them know more and blah blah blah. And I end up incorporating the actual like story of Five Nights at Freddy's a bit more into those Dark Nights, and it starts getting a bit more serious. And I basically took existing elements from the VHS tapes from, the Five Nights at Freddy's games, and I kind of made my own story based off of those events and those games and already established lore. And eventually one idea keeps leading to the next, and then that idea leads to the next, and next thing you know, I'm planning out a whole story, and next thing you know, I'm done. I have my first rough draft of a story. And that's how the entire Pentalogy is. It's kind of just winging it and then going back later and realizing some mistakes or some things I want to change and making it the way I want it to be, which is a really, really fun way, especially with Five Nights at Freddy's being something I really like and have liked for a very long time. It's just really fun to do. And of course, I don't really care to publish these stories, and even if I did, it'd be like impossible to, because like, Five Nights at Freddy's is owned by Scott Cawthon, it's not really my stuff. I can't post or sell it without permission and all that. So, but again, I'm just writing it for fun. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about my creative writing class and kind of how it affected the Pentalogy. I've been writing stories for a while. I think since like 9th or 10th grade is kind of when I started writing stories. I started way back with a story called My Tale Entries. It has nothing to do with the Pentalogy, but it's my starting point. It's where I really started to write. It was ninth or 10th grade, I can't quite remember. And when I first started writing, I barely knew anything. I would not indent whenever there's a new paragraph. I would always put periods at the end of a quote when you're supposed to put a comma with a speaker tag. I didn't have speaker tags. There was no Jackson said or Carter said or whatever after someone spoke. None of that. There'd be multiple characters talking to each other at once, and the best you would get is an occasional sentence of someone directly saying someone's name as they're speaking to them. That's the best you would get. It was bad in the beginning. I had no idea what I was doing, but I did manage to get at least some ideas down. And I've since extended that story, tried to fix it up a little bit, but the route I'm taking with it now, especially with how long that one is I'm just making a whole new story. It's still like going to be the same ideas. It's just I'm rewriting it entirely. Fast forward to the beginning of 12th grade, my senior year, and I start taking creative writing class. By this point, I've learned a little more, but, you know, like I know that I need speaker tags, and I kind of know to indent, but I didn't fully learn that until I took class, and, you know, I learned pretty early on with, like, peer edits and stuff that we did with our pieces. And I learned, do a comma instead of a period at the end of your quote because you're going to put a speaker tag. Technically, it's not a finished sentence, therefore you wouldn't put a period there yet. You would put it at the end of, like, the speaker tag, whatever. So I learned some pretty important stuff when it came to writing. And it also helped me learn some issues I have because especially with, like, Five Nights at Freddy's, Undertale, those are, like, my main two things. That's my jam, you know? Like, I love those things. I love incorporating them to my stories. And my problem is I know what I'm talking about, but my problem is I don't know how to tell people that without stopping and being like, wait. Did what I write make sense to people who are reading it who have no idea what I'm talking about? Because that's my problem, is I'll just go. I know what I'm talking about. I'm just going to keep going. But then I have to stop and I have to go back. And I'm like, well, I know what I'm talking about here, but people don't know what I'm talking about. That's a big issue I had, is I'm like, I know what I'm talking about, therefore people know what I'm talking about, which is obviously not the case. That's not how that works. So that's a problem. It still creeps into my writing, but usually I'll do like a rough draft, a final draft, share the final draft with somebody, and they're like, yep, looks good, or nope, you got to tweak this. And, I'm pretty good about that issue now. Getting a bit more on topic specific to the Pentalogy, creative writing class is a good chunk of the reason for the Pentalogy existing in the first place. One of the very first assignments we had to do in creative writing class was write a flash fiction story. And if you recall to the very beginning of this video, I said that the first story in the series of the Pentalogy is a flash fiction story. I don't really want to spoil the events, especially if you're a new reader, but for those of you who know Five Nights at Freddy's, basically the flash fiction story is just Night 5 sister location. That's basically it. It kind of gives you, it doesn't, I don't know, it kind of helps me depict Michael a little bit, because it's from Michael's POV. He's going back there for Night 5, but, I'm not going to say too much, but for those of you who know Five Nights at Freddy's, you already probably know what's going on there. But the thing is, the flash fiction story is still really good to have, because it lets you know that Michael exists. It kind of lets you know what's going to go, like, what's happening to him later on once you get to the third story in the series and Michael just shows up again. Because if I didn't have that first story, it'd kind of be like, well, who the heck is this Michael guy? What the heck's going on with him? At least with the flash fiction story, despite it being only about 800 words, being kind of short because, flash fiction, it still gives you important details that you would need to know about him and what he's been through, at least a little bit, and you'll learn more about him in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. So around the beginning of 12th grade is when I got the idea for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. I figured, Those Dark Nights has, the, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, and it has that pizzeria in the story. It's a fairly important part of that story alone. But I figured a story kind of expanding on that pizzeria alone could be good. And then I had the idea of putting Michael in there and kind of having it be more about Michael, so Michael actually can be more fleshed out and still have plenty of opportunities to expand upon the lore. Fun fact, the actual lore, because like in the Five Nights at Freddy's games, you're just looking at the games, you're playing the games, you're trying to survive, whatever. But in the background, there's a story that's going on, and that's what all the theories and whatnot are about, and that's like the lore, what's actually happening in the background that isn't directly told to you. I don't want to be as mysterious about my lore. Like, I want my lore to be in the books, but I still want it to be kind of like the same aspect. Like, you're reading a story, you're finding out what's happening to the characters, but if you dig deeper, listen closely, and read carefully, you will pick out like the story, because I'm retelling the story of FNaF basically, or Five Nights at Freddy's, and I'm kind of doing so in my own words. Some things are similar, like there's still William killing his 5 original victims, and trying to bring his son back to life, yada yada. But there's also things that I won't mention that are completely different. Like, I guess I won't get into specifics, but like Michael, for example, like the games barely characterize Michael. Yet I have, a flash fiction story about Michael, and then a whole story about Michael. I think it's probably the longest in the series so far. I know the 4th story in the series is probably going to be the longest, and I don't know about the 5th and final one, how long that's going to be. I don't know much about what my plans are for that one yet. But I'm basically taking what I know, adding my own ideas, expanding on already established ideas, and using some already established ideas, and kind of just mixing it all together to just make my own unique story that's the Five Nights at Freddy's story, but also not, if that makes sense. And despite already having the idea for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place and having it started a little bit, I didn't really sit down and focus fully on writing it until the multi-genre project came around, because for my multi-genre project, I couldn't use old stuff, otherwise I might have thrown the flash fiction story in there, just because it's the 3 stories I have written so far. But I decided to throw Those Dark Nights and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place in as one of the 3 major writing pieces. The other being a kind of like a website thingy that I made in Canva. And then the 3rd piece is this video, except, it has to have something to do with writing. So I have a script written up for this, which I've been glancing at here and there. It's basically just bullet points, and it's been helping me get through this. So I say get through this like I'm suffering making this, but no, this is something I want to make. It's just my memory sucks, so having the bullet points there really helps me remember what I'm talking about. Because having like a hard deadline for when I need to have it done, especially like with writing, because it doesn't just come to you immediately usually. But luckily enough, I picked something that I like to write about, therefore I just needed more of a reason to spend more of my time writing it. And the class definitely helped me with that, especially since I chose to do it as part of my multi-genre project, which I'm very grateful for, because I was able to get it done. A tad late, but I got it done. Also, with like every project we did, like with the flash fiction story, the poem unit, the short story unit, basically, I guess you could probably pick anyone in the classroom, but like everybody sat at tables. I sat at a table with a couple friends, and we basically would just peer edit. And, we would all print off what we wrote, staple it together, get multiple copies for each person at the table. There was me and 3 others, so each of us would get 3 copies for the other 3 people. And if we had enough time in class, we'd get to everybody. We usually didn't, mostly because I wrote really long stuff. But we would basically take each other's things, we'd read through it with like a pencil or pen and write down notes, just standard peer edit stuff. And then we would talk about it, hand it back for the person, so they'd have the verbal and written feedback, and then they'd go on their way, and when they have time, implement whatever feedback they got, which was, for me, very helpful, and also how I learned some more proper writing techniques, like I talked about earlier, with needing to indent, when to use periods or commas inside of quotes, and all that other fun stuff. So that was a really big help for me. And I believe I already mentioned the order of the 5 stories. Well, I haven't named the last 2 yet, but I will here in a minute or so. But the order of the stories, the first one is the flash fiction story. The second one is Those Dark Nights. The third one is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. And then there is a sequel, and I don't know, whatever the term is for after a sequel, for those Dark Knights. It's basically those Dark Knights 2 and 3 is basically what I'm trying to say. So as in the beginning I said that you should probably at least read those 3 stories before you watch too far into this video. Now I'm going to be talking about them a little bit, and you're going to get some probably bigger spoilers here. So if you're at this point and you haven't read them, please read them. I'd hate to spoil them because I think they're pretty good. I think they're pretty cool. I think especially if you're like a Five Nights at Freddy's fan, I think you could really get behind them, especially if you're one of the people who like to dig out the lore or whatever. I actually had a night because actually, you know what? I'll talk about that in the next segment. Okay, so I want to talk about each of the 5 stories. I want to talk about each one individually to get a bit more of a in-depth thoughts on it. So we're going to start with the flash fiction story, or its actual name, Inhuman. And the reason I try to hide the name is because for those who haven't read it, the name is supposed to be a little more significant. It's at the end of the story instead of up at the top at the beginning. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Originally, when we were handed the assignment of a flash fiction story, the rule was that it had to be a page and a half long or less. I've done some research, and a more official rule for flash fiction stories is 1,500 words or less. It's not really page-based, it's more how many words you have, especially since if it was page-based, a lot of actual stories and whatnot are double-spaced in 12 point and with Times New Roman or something like that, which really just eats away a lot of page length or space. So I have, since submitting the assignment, added a little more and made it double spaced and all that. So it is a little longer, but it's still only about 800 words. So for an official flash fiction story, it still meets the requirements. And I could make the flash fiction story or Inhuman longer, but I do like having it as a flash fiction story. The reason I want to keep it short, and the reason I still want it, right? I still want it to be there as kind of the introduction to Michael. It also has a bit of a gruesome moment, so it's kind of going to show you that I'm not going to stray away. It's not going to be a PG story. It's going to be more PG-13, and there's going to be swears and whatever, I'm not going to stray away from anything, really. I'm going to put in it what I want to put in it. It's also going to give you a really good idea of Michael, or at least his situation anyways, and how things play out with him. Probably said that a billion times already. Probably say it again. But the reason I want to keep it short is and for those of you who know the Five Nights at Freddy's games, the 5th main installment is Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. And the flash fiction story is basically just me retelling the events of Night 5 with a tad bit of a spin on it. I mean, I try to put a little bit of a spin, at least a little bit of spin on most of what I put in. I don't want to just be copy paste FNaF story, read it, And, it's more fun that way to, make something somewhat original rather than just a complete copy. Because if I'm just copying down what somebody's already written, then where's the fun in that, But the reason it's not longer is because I feel like then I would just be straight up copying it. Because there's not a whole lot I could really change between the 5 nights of the game versus me telling the 5 nights with a story. I feel like there's just not enough for me to change up there. I feel like there wouldn't be enough opportunities that I would find to characterize Michael, especially since Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place is going to do that just fine anyways. So that's the reason why I don't want to keep it too long. I want to keep it short as a flash fiction story. Being a shorter story, I don't have as much to say on it, so we're going to move into Those Dark Nights, which I've already talked about this one a lot, so I might not talk about it too much more. So with Those Dark Nights, I've already told you about the whole VHS thing, kind of how it started, and originally it was all over the place. The story was, supposed to be FNaF themed, but this is back when I was still just with the old version, the rough draft version, if you will, and I didn't really know where I wanted it to go, or at least I didn't have much in concrete. I had some ideas floating around, but I didn't have anything really in concrete, nothing solid. Over the course of 2 or 3 days, I spent about 10 hours just sitting on a Google Doc writing out the lore that I wanted. This is the year the Afton family was born. Like, this is when William was born, this is when Michael was born, this is when Evan and Elizabeth were born. This is when this happened. Everybody was this old when this happened. And it's basically like, imagine like a lore video for Five Nights at Freddy's, like the games. They are sitting there explaining to you, because of this event happened, which led to this event, which led to this event, where this person felt like this, therefore they did this. That's basically what I wrote down, just to have it there for me to read and know what I'm talking about, to have something in concrete. So I basically have the whole lore from whatever year, I'm not going to tell you, from whatever year, the story started, all the way up to the current year of those Dark Nights, which I also won't tell you the year. You can figure it out. I made sure you can figure it out. All right, we're going to move on to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, the third story in the series, or the Pentalogy, which is what I'm calling the whole series, by the way. I'm not just saying the Pentalogy as in, like, yeah, it's a series of stories that consists of 5 stories. No, I mean, that's literally what I'm calling the series of stories. Like, I have 3, 4, it's a very big work in progress, but I have like 3 or 4 stories that all go together, trilogy or whatever, called the AUP stories. Like, that's my name for all the stories put together. My name for all of the stories in the Pentalogy is literally just the Pentalogy. That's literally the name, which I kind of like. It's very simple, but it gets the point across. So anyways, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. Okay, so this is where some big spoilers are going to happen. So, like, if you seriously have not read the 3 stories thus far, please read them, because this is going to be some bigger spoilers here. I want to talk a bit about the lore. I want to talk about the salvages. I kind of want to explain who the animatronics are, because in the 6th main installment of Five Nights at Freddy's, the salvages, the whole idea of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place is to gather some of the remaining souls who are trapped in animatronics. It's basically to lure them all in to one place, strike a match, burn them alive, to kill them, set them free, whatever. And my story, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, is no different, except instead of featuring just 4 animatronics that salvage, those being Molten Freddy, in the game, it's just the 4. It's Molten Freddy, which is basically just the fun time animatronics. There's Scrap Baby, which is Circus Baby / Elizabeth. There's Scrap Trap, which is William Afton, the killer. And then there's Lefty, which is also the puppet / Henry's daughter, Charlotte Emily. So in my story, I still have 3 of those. I do not have William. He does not show up because he's going to show up later. But we still have Lefty / puppet / Charlotte Emily, and we still have Scrap Baby / Elizabeth, and we still have Molten Freddy, which is like the Fun Times, except it's just Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy. There's no Circus Baby in there. So something I did differently compared to the games is I added in a bunch of toy animatronics, because in my stories, part of the lore is that, there was the original pizzeria with the original Freddy, Chica, Foxy, Bonnie. Then, soon after, for reasons, there were the toy animatronics that came, which was just Toy Freddy, Toy Chica, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Foxy. It's literally just, the newer, upgraded versions of them. The toy animatronics stuck around for a really long time, and I want to say stuff, but I don't want to spoil too much, On second thought, I kind of outright tell you that in those Dark Nights at some point. Basically, William murdered children after the first 5 victims because he was mad at Henry for kicking him out of, Fazbear Entertainment, the company they ran. So he started killing kids at random Freddy Fazbear Pizza locations, and just as he did with his original 5 victims, he used the suits of animatronics to hide the bodies, which, the body and the animatronic, the soul, whatever happens in the games that makes them fuse and possess the animatronics, whatever, that happens, basically. And the same logic of, let's build Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place to bring in all the to bring in William and the Fun Times and whoever else, it brings in all of those guys. And the reason they're all toy animatronics is because when William made those killings, he only had the toy animatronics to work with. So a bunch of possessed by, dead children toy animatronics are roaming around causing issues. Henry wants to bring them all to one place and set their souls free, make things right. So that's why we have all these random toy animatronics showing up. And then in the last week of Michael working there before they burn the place down, that's when we get to arguably some of the more interesting ones of Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby, and Lefty / Puppet / Charlotte Emily. Another thing I've put a lot of thought into is specifically Michael's body. In the Flash fiction story, he basically, there's just a giant metal scoop. It just scoops his insides right out. He is literally just a shell. Like, he's literally just me with literally nothing inside. It's just his skin. That's it. And there's really no explanation for how his body then works, functions, whatever. I mean, there kind of is with, like, the thing, but, there's no, like, real explanation for it. And it's kind of supposed to be, because, like, Five Nights at Freddy's with the whole bodies put into or near animatronic makes them possess a thing. There's a lot of, like, supernatural stuff that happens. Michael still being alive, if you want to call it alive anyways, because that's kind of the question he raised at the end of Inhuman, is like, is he human or not? Or is he alive or not, But part of it is, like, how is he alive? How does his body function? It's supposed to kind of just be more supernatural, whatever, but I cannot stress this enough that he does not have organs in his body. I know there's times where he feels like it's something along the lines of, like, Michael feels like a sensation of a heart beating in his chest, despite it not being there and him not having a heart or whatever. Like, he can, for whatever reason, still feel his heart beating or chills down. I guess it wouldn't be his spine, because he doesn't have a spine, it'd be down his back. He can still feel stuff like that, even though he shouldn't. He can still consume stuff, though he doesn't need to. So next up brings us to the sequel of Those Dark Nights, which, fun fact, when I was originally writing these stories, there was no Flash fiction story, and there was no Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. It was just Those Dark Nights, and I was like, okay, we have a cool little epilogue here about Donovan and how he's still alive through Toy Foxy or whatever. What comes next? We need the sequel, right? And I don't have a official name yet for it, so I've literally just been calling it Those Dark Nights 2. That's literally what I've been calling it, because I still can't think of a good name. I've finally gotten some ideas, but, I'll eventually get a more solid name. Towards the end of Those Dark Nights, and I think maybe even in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, we're kind of told that Henry's business of Freddy Fazbear Entertainment, due to corporate manslaughter charges, is shut down. He has to recall everything. He has to destroy the Fazbear name. He basically rebrands to, I think it's like Freddy and Friends Entertainment is what he rebrands to. And under that new company, he makes the Mega Pizzaplex with the new line of animatronics, going from the toy animatronics to the Glam Rocks from the game that came out, from the FNaF game that came out in December of 2021, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. And I really want to stray away from talking about these last two stories too much because, spoilers, and you can't read them first before I talk about them because I still have to write them as of making this video. So, but it all takes place, or at least it focuses on the Mega Pizzaplex and some characters like Henry, Donovan, a few that I don't want to mention because spoilers. TDN2, Those Dark Nights 2, I abbreviate them, my story names a lot because they're kind of long, some of them. TDN2 is going to kind of be like the end of the overall story, or at least kind of like a soft close to most things. It's going to tie up most, if not all, the loose ends that we currently know of at the very least. What I'm trying to say is that there's going to be one more story after it, which is going to be TDN3. I have a name for this one, Remnants. Actually, the day I thought of the idea for TDN3, I was like, Remnants. That's a perfect name for it. That one is... I don't really know entirely what's going to happen with that one yet, because that's still a little far away. to be thinking too much about. I kind of need to write TDN2 first before I can start getting the ideas for Remnants or TDN3. But with Remnants or TDN3, it's going to be some kind of time jump. It could be a couple years, 5, 10, 20 years. It's not going to be anything crazy. It's not going to be 100 years later, Freddy and Friends Entertainment still going strong or whatever. It's not going to be any of that. The most I think the time jump would be is 20 years. That's the most I think I would do. But it's going to be probably like a couple years up to 20 years of a time skip. And it's basically just going to bring a close to certain characters. You're going to, like when those, you're watching a TV show and it eventually wraps up with one episode or maybe one season of, this is the future of all these characters. And it's not like super late into their lives. They're not all super old now, but they're older. They're more middle-aged or whatever. And you get a good look into what their life eventually turned into. It's kind of going to be like that. It's still going to have an adventure. It's still going to explore some new bad guys or whatever, situations that need to be dealt with, a few last loose ends that will be tied up, you could say. But as far as I'm concerned, once those last few loose ends are tied up in TDN3/Remnants, the story is officially going to be over. I'm not going to do like a 6th or 7th story. I don't think I will. And I know I briefly mentioned at some point in here, like my other little series that I've got going on, the AUP stories. During writing the Pentalogy, I was also writing the AUP stories and trying to balance them. Today I feel like doing the AUP stories. The next day I feel like working on the Pentalogy. The next day I don't feel like working on either, or whatever. Especially since I started writing some of the Pentalogy for creative writing classes, some more stricter deadlines, I really had to just sit there and focus on one or the other. So I basically put the AUP stories on hold, and I'm focusing on the Pentalogy now. So all my writing time, or at least most of it, is going to end up going into, especially now that I've finished up FFPP, or Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, it's going to be going into those Dark Knights 2 and 3. And before we go, I do have some fun facts. I'm pretty much just going to read these directly, so I apologize for that. But I have a few fun facts I'd like to share about my stories that you may or may not enjoy. Whenever I often listen to music, and sometimes when I do, I think we all listen to music, and if we do, we all go off into fairy tale land. We all start imagining whatever we want to imagine about, and sometimes that happens to be my stories, and I'll play certain events that happen in those stories in my mind while listening to music. And sometimes I'll even think of what's going to happen next in a story, or get some ideas, and it kind of helps me flesh out certain scenes of my stories that I've already written, and kind of helps me make certain scenes of new ones. So I don't know, it's just something I do that's a bit of a fun fact I think you guys would enjoy. Funnily enough, back when I started the Pentalogy, the very first time I started working on it was Halloween of 2023. October 31st, 2023. What's funny is that, and I'm not going to tell you which one, but in one of the 5 stories, that date happens to occur. Halloween 2023. There's no significance. It's not like in the story I tell something that happened to me on Halloween 2023. No, it's not related. It's just kind of a funny fact that I noticed. I first made the doc and started writing Those Dark Knights 2 officially on January 25th of 2024. As of recording this, it's January 6th, 2025, so it's been almost a year since that story has started. I think it's got about 10 chapters now. I'd have to go back and look. It technically has 11 chapters, 10 of them are complete. I have gotten to a point with TDN2. I like the story, I like where it's going for the most part. And like I said, I'm kind of just making it up as I go, and then fitting pieces of the puzzle where they happen to fit. I'm now getting to a point where I'm thinking about having to change some stuff up, go back a little bit, take a step back to be able to take some steps forward. Kind of not liking where Chapter 11 is leading up to, 10 and 11 are leading up to, so I might change some things up there. But overall, I really like the story, and the more I think about it, the more I plan about it, the more I'm getting a idea of what I want the whole thing to be like. And writing stories oftentimes is a lot easier when you know your end point, because you can constantly work towards it and always think about everything you write, how is it going to affect the end. Arguably, it is more fun to not know where you're going and keep writing it. It does take longer, usually, at least for me anyways, but it's a lot more fun that way. I believe I've mentioned the other series I'm working on, or going to be working on after the Pentalogy, of the AUP stories. A good part of the reason I put those on hold is it's either going to consist of 3 or 4 stories, because I had like 4 or 5 stories for it, and I was like, I don't really need this one. This one I could or could not need, or maybe change up, make a different story to serve the same purpose, whatever. The bulk of the story between all the stories, how many times can I say story until you get confused? The bulk of the lore, or whatever, bulk of the story inside of the books is in My Tale Entries, is the name of it. I have an old version, or rough draft version, whatever you want to call it. It's not done, and it's like 80,000 something words. That's a lot. I estimate it would get up to 100,000 or so if I finished it. But it was also one of the very first things I started writing ever, so it had a lot of those mistakes in it. And while I did go back and fix some of those issues, it got to the point where not only were those issues too prominent to go back through for 80,000 words, but it also kind of got to a point where I realized a lot of what's in here is a result of the issue of me knowing what I'm talking about and not explaining or expanding on it, and also just kind of spitballing until I get to an end result that I like. And unfortunately, to be able to get to the end result I would like with that story, I do have to completely restart. Now, it's still going to be the same story. Like, there's still going to be the same main character. He's still going to have the same, roughly the same character development and backstory, and he's going to face a lot of the same foes and blah, blah, blah. Don't want to spoil too much. Even though if you really did some digging on this channel, you could probably find like a post or something where you would be able to grant yourself access to said story. But my best course of action for My Tale Entries is to make a whole new doc and completely start rewriting the story from the ground up. Which I can still refer to the old version to kind of remember some of the ideas I put in there. But I still, especially with My Tale Entries, it's been an idea, a story that I've been making up just simply in my head, not on paper or anything, for a couple of years before, way back in 9th or 10th grade, I did start putting it on paper on Google Docs, actually writing it down. So it's a story I really like, and it's pretty original, I think. I actually kind of told my creative writing teacher a little bit about it, and she said it kind of sounded similar to like Rick and Morty with like the whole multiverse stuff, which was kind of funny. I do suspect that the rewrite of My Tale Entries is going to reach 100,000 words, because between the original and the rewrite, there is so much randomness that I need to cut out, but there's also so many new ideas for things I could add and portray and whatnot in there that I think it's still going to bulk it up just fine, if not be even longer. And it's going to have a lot of the same characters, a lot of the same problems. And My Tale Entry suffers from that issue of I know what I'm talking about, but I don't convey it, because characters will just show up that have some kind of connection to the main character, and main character and that new character will just start interacting, and it's like, wait, what? How did they know each other? How did all this happen? Or something will just happen and there's just no explanation for it. I know where it came from. It's all up in here. I know where it came from. I know what's going on, but I didn't convey that. And with it being so long, it really is just better, because even if I go back, spend all that time to fix it up, I feel like it's still not quite going to be where I want it, and I could spend the same amount of time, give or take, just completely rewriting it and getting a much better result. Anyways, that's enough of a tangent about something that doesn't relate to the Pentalogy, the whole point of this video. One more fun fact we have here, speaking of words, between the flash fiction story those Dark Knights and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, I have written almost 32,000 words, which equates to a total page count of 129. That's a lot. That's a lot. Overall, the reason I'm making this video may have been because creative writing class forced my hand a bit, but I am also glad to kind of make this video because it's something I would have made anyways, and I suppose there are still benefits to making it now. I'm not done with all 5 stories yet, but maybe I could get some ideas and opinions on the 3 videos I've already, or 3 videos, the 3 stories I've already made, and I just get a feel of what people think of them and all that. So I am still happy to be making this video now, though, the original plan was to wait a little longer till all 5 are done, but that would probably be a good while yet. So that's about all I have for right now. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. Feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments. I will try to avoid spoilers. If it's a question about one of the 3 stories for the Pentalogy that I've already mentioned, I will assume that you've already read them and that I won't be spoiling stuff, so keep that in mind. If you ask a question that could lead to spoilers, probably should read the stuff first. But I feel like if you're asking the question in the first place, you probably read it, so kind of a dumb rule, but And in the description, I will have plenty of things linked. I will have, obviously, the 3 stories in the Pentalogy that I mentioned will be linked. I will link those 3 FNaF VHS tapes I was talking about. I actually also have like a Google Doc with all of my stories on it. I mean, a lot of those are pretty work in progress, but also on there will be some of the Pentalogy stories as they come out, and plenty of other information overall. So I guess I could link the All My Stories doc as well if you want to read all of my stories, which includes that old version of My Tale Entries. Take that one with a big grain of salt if you choose to tackle that roughly 80,000 word monster of a story. Not my best work. The story itself is good, but the writing wasn't very good, so I need to work on that, as I said I would at some point. And again, unless you guys have some questions for me in the comments below, that's going to wrap up our video. Feel free to leave feedback in the comments, because I'm writing these stories just for fun, and I'd love to get some feedback on them, especially for like Five Nights at Freddy's fans. Like, if you know some Five Nights at Freddy's fans, feel free to like share my stories and or this video with them, because I think this is something a lot of Five Nights at Freddy's fans could get behind, and I'd really love to find some of like the lore people who like to dig around for the lore. I'd love to see them pick apart my stories and figure out the lore. That'd be pretty cool. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.